What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and I want to put this idea out there. I don't know if anything will ever come of it, but I want to put this out there. Jensen Ackles, playing Soldier Boy from The Boys, and in Supernatural, and Smallville, and just one of the coolest guys ever from the interviews I've seen. This guy should be brought into the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and he should play Hyperion in Secret Wars with the Russo brothers. And here's the reason why. But before we get into that, we got to pay the bills here on Geek Culture Explained. So this video is brought to you by Atlas VPN. So right now, Atlas VPN has this deal going on where you can get their service for like $1.83 a month. That's a ridiculously good deal. And for those of you all who are not familiar with VPNs, this is called a virtual private network. What this means is that when you don't have a virtual private network and you get on your computer and you browse the internet, your actual IP address from your house can be seen. With a virtual private network, what you do is you make it look like you're actually somewhere else. Now, I use Atlas VPN for a couple different reasons. The first one is because of something called geo-restricting. For those of you guys who don't know what that means, when it comes to different streaming services out there, oftentimes what they do is they restrict content based on your geographic location. Now, in the States, it's not necessarily an issue insofar as like what you can see in California, you can see in Texas. But say, for example, that you were taking a trip to Spain and you wanted to stay caught up on your shows, you might not be able to see those shows because you're in Spain. Whereas if you have a VPN, you can basically get around that. Another reason why I use Atlas VPN, and in this day and age, I feel like this is an incredibly important thing, is because of their data breaching monitor feature. Basically meaning that what the software does is it continually scans the internet to see whether or not your personal information has basically been the subject or been a victim of a giant data breach that exists out there, which seems to happen more and more frequently. But based on those two things alone, I found Atlas VPN to be more than worth the $1.83 a month. So make sure you guys check out the link down in the description. Make sure you grab your copy of Atlas VPN, and let's get back into the video. So here's the thing, when it comes to Jensen Ackles being Hyperion in the MCU, this really comes from a couple different places. The first one is that it comes from Secret Wars, which we know is a project that the Russo brothers are working on. We don't know the full scope of it, which is to say exactly how the movie is going to look, or movies. If I'm a betting man, I'd say it'll probably be a couple films. I don't know if they'll do 3, but I could see them doing 2, which honestly, after the success of Infinity War and Avengers Endgame, I think will kind of be the unofficial indicator from the MCU that like this is an Infinity War / Avengers Endgame level event that's happening in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, right? It's kind of saying it's 2 parts, which is basically their way of telling us it's going to be pretty massive in scope. But the other reason why I think this would work anyway is because of Thor. One of the things to know is that in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and I'm sure you guys have felt it by now, the concept of Thor is kind of wearing out its welcome to a degree. Not in the sense that I don't want to see Thor anymore, but the reality here is that when it comes to a Thor-esque character in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, all we have is Thor. Now, that looks like it may change with Hercules because of the post-credit scene in Thor Love and Thunder, but I'm not entirely sure what they're going to do with that. If Taika Waititi is going to be the one to helm that project, because the reality here, and you guys may not know this if you haven't read the comics, but the way that Thor's been depicted in Thor 3 and Thor 4, that's actually how Hercules has been depicted in the comics in more recent years. Now, whether or not that's going to roll over into the MCU in terms of personal mannerisms, how the character is written, I'm not entirely sure. Maybe Hercules will bring us back to what Thor used to be in terms of being a far more serious character. I'm not entirely sure. But the thing about this is that Thor in the MCU is like the only real heavy hitter of his kind that we have, insofar as like a god that exists out there and a person who can fly and that kind of a thing. Now, you can't really fault the MCU for that because they've been building all of this up for the last 10 years. So with Phase 4, we're just now getting to a point where we're after the events of Infinity War and Endgame, and we can start focusing on building other characters, some of which, or one of which, could potentially even replace Thor. So can't really fault him on that too much. But for the nature of Hyperion, again, kind of looking at the comics here for a second, the nature of Hyperion is that if we go with Marcus Milton from Earth 13034, he is, by all standards of measurement, the closest you get to a Superman analog that's also comparable to Thor. And the reason for this is because the way his character was done during Jonathan Hickman's Avengers and New Avengers, which I think we can all agree in more recent years, the Marvel Cinematic Universe has been heavily basing a lot of their content off of, that in that story, Marcus Milton was initially introduced as basically the survivor of one of the incursions. Now, we already know incursions exist in the MCU. We know that from Doctor Strange 2, and I'll make a video at a later date that explores more of what the incursions, what could actually be going on there. But the way this played out is that with those two universes crashing into each other, that Marcus Milton actually held them apart momentarily. For a brief moment, right, for a few seconds, he basically held two universes apart, which was a testament to how strong he was. Ultimately, those two universes crashed into each other, but because of the level of power that Hyperion had, he actually survived in what was basically this empty white space of where these two universes used to exist in the multiverse. Ultimately, he's plucked out of that space by advanced idea mechanics and then ultimately saved by the Avengers. But the way that he was done is that he was a very Boy Scout type character, right? In the sense that he always believed in doing the right thing and so on and so forth. When you get to Hickman's Avengers and New Avengers and you do the 8-month time skip, you pick up with Hyperion 8 months later, and he's a lot more battle hardened, and he's far more in line with like the nature of Thor, right? Like they both drink mead, they both love to fight. He's very much a Thor-esque character. And honestly, I think that given the nature of Jensen Ackles and the way that he looked as Soldier Boy in The Boys, I think he would be an amazing fit here. Right, I think he would be a phenomenal fit here. And here's the reason why. One, he's already got the voice, right? There's a kind of rough and grusk voice that Jensen Ackles have. I use grusk because I can't really think of like a better word, right? You know what I mean? Like just kind of, yeah, I'm Jensen Ackles, yeah, I'm Soldier Boy, and I'm gonna mess stuff up, like that kind of a thing. Just that rough voice. Almost like a whiskey voice to a degree. But the way he looks when he's Soldier Boy is very similar to the way that Hyperion looked in the comics, right? In the sense that minus the ponytail, right? He's just got that rough and tumble look that Hyperion had later on in the comics. And so just based on that, I think it would fit well. I think Hyperion would be a great introduction into the MCU as a potential replacement for Thor, or at the very least, somebody to accompany Thor to kind of add into it, because I think that for the most part, a Thor-type character just kind of needs to exist, if for no other reason than the fact that we as the audience are just sort of used to it, and there's success there. You can't look at the first 10 years of the MCU and argue that Thor is not successful. He is. You could probably make an argument about Thor 4, but I digress. The point being that having a Thor-type character in the MCU, I think is somewhat of a necessity. And I think Jensen Ackles playing the role of Hyperion as essentially a replacement for Thor is a great way to do that, because then it also brings in his own storytelling. One of the big questions that you would have to ask here, though, when it comes to having Hyperion in the MCU is, one, what would be the scope of his character in the sense of what role would he play? Would the MCU seriously consider replacing Thor with Hyperion, or is that spot already reserved for Hercules? And the second question you would have to ask is, how are they going to make his powers work? Because with the nature of Hyperion in Marvel Comics, right, that version of Hyperion, there's been a whole bunch. There's like King Hyperion, who basically killed all the cosmic entities and the superheroes in his own universe. He was ridiculously powerful, and the only reason he was stopped was because of Adam Brashear, the Blue Marvel, who is also just ridiculously broken. But the version that we're talking about here, Marcus Milton from Earth 13034, he's basically Superman, right? He's got X-ray vision, telescopic vision. The only real power of Superman that he doesn't have, as far as I'm aware, is frost breath. And even then, like, I'm a little murky on that. Maybe he can do that, I don't really know. But barring that, like, you read his stories, even his origin is identical to that of Superman's. And so that really goes into like how powerful he is, that he had to be a character that was comparable to Superman, both in terms of his origin, and his looks, as well as his level of power. I mean, Hyperion is crazy overpowered in the comics. And so I imagine the MCU bringing him in would probably scale his powers down to something comparable to Thor. Now, one of the funny things is that with the nature of Thor in the MCU, he's not that far off from the comics in terms of his strength and durability and what he's capable of. The only thing that we haven't really seen in the MCU that Thor has in terms of power is the God Blast. We haven't necessarily seen that as far as I'm aware. Maybe we have, right? Maybe it's just one of those things that they just kind of gave to us, didn't really draw a whole lot of attention to, and wildly scaled it down. But the God Blast of Thor in the comics was enough to like overpower a Celestial. So it's a pretty huge amount of energy that he has. He doesn't use it very often. I also don't think that we've seen Thor's Berserker Rage in the MCU, but maybe I missed that. Thor does have a berserker state that he goes into. It's called the Warrior's Madness, but I don't think we've seen that in the MCU. But I digress here. The point is that Thor's pretty accurate in the Marvel Cinematic Universe compared to his comic book version, minus one or two differences. It's like a totally different game with the Incredible Hulk. But when it comes to Hyperion, is that something they would continue? Would they keep his power comparable to what it is in the comics, or would they decrease his power? That's one of the big questions to ask going forward from phases 1, 2, and 3 into phase 4 going forward. Is the Marvel Cinematic Universe going to start offering this drastic scope of power? I mean, the Scarlet Witch is a great example of a character who seemed to largely be innocuous in terms of their powers, getting a massive power boost. Now, how far reaching that goes, I don't entirely know. But the point is here that we could be looking at a position in the Marvel Cinematic Universe going forward where they start rolling in these major heavy hitters and they don't decrease their power, right? They don't knock them down from as powerful as they are in the comics. Or if they do, it's a decrease in maybe marginal ways, depending on the type of movie that they're making. But regardless, let me know what you guys think down in the comment section, right? Let me know if you guys feel like seeing Hyperion in the MCU played by Jensen Ackles is a legitimate possibility, because I feel like he looks the part. And also make sure you guys check out the link in the description to get your copy of Atlas VPN. Thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.